Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of our beloved podcast, RAIA Affairs. We're very excited today to be your co-hosts, Marina and Serene. We're both international relations students interning at RAIA. Serene, why don't you give us a quick explanation of what RAIA is all about?
Sure, Marina. So to give our listeners a quick overview, RAIA is an international think tank led by young professionals that translates the abstract world of international affairs by simplifying rather than generalizing. RAIA is a place where you come to learn about the stories and worries of political leaders, the behind the scenes of decision makers, and how politics impacts and changes your life. This is RAIA Affairs, filling you in wherever you are.
Expressed opinions in this episode are welcome, even though they're not a direct reflection of RAIA. RAIA specializes in unbiased writing and analysis. Anyways, last episode, we discussed President Gotabaya of Sri Lanka as he navigates through a food and fuel shortage and civil unrest. We looked into multiple factors regarding his decision-making in the political realm with RAIA writer Ross Hardy, as well as the involvement of foreign actors such as the IMF, China, and India, and Sri Lanka's background.
So last week's topic featured questions in which we analyzed Gotabaya's financial dependence on other actors versus Sri Lanka's sovereignty, as well as the difficulty of decision-making in times of crisis, much of which actually is similar to the leader we will be looking at today. So to kick off this episode, we will be discussing a leader on the rise, Serbian President Vučić, and his controversial camaraderie with Putin. RAIA writer Michael Duffy will join us to understand how this affects Serbian interests regarding their future with the EU. Marina, on to you.
All right. Hi, Michael, and welcome to RAIA Affairs. Why don't you just begin by introducing yourself? So where you're from, what do you do, and why did you choose to join RAIA?
Thank you so much, Serene and Marina, for having me on the podcast today. It's a real pleasure to be here on RAIA Affairs. My name is Michael Duffy. I'm from the United States, and I'm currently a student in IE University in Madrid, Spain. And I chose RAIA because I thought it was a great opportunity to have a professional experience, learning about international relations, learning about geopolitics, and everything that's going on today.
Perfect, Michael. Thanks for that introduction. We're just going to ask all our writers as well this question so our listeners can get a sense of who you are, I guess, outside of just RAIA. So as someone who's passionate about IR, as you just mentioned, you're a student, you work with IR in RAIA. What leader, dead or alive, who has impacted the world would you like to have a 5-minute conversation with? And feel free to get as creative as you would like to.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. I'd say that the one that I would like to have a 5-minute conversation with probably would be Toussaint Louverture, which is the ex-military general of the Haitian rebellion during the Haitian Revolution back in 1803 to 1804. Being a person of Haitian descent, I think it would be an incredibly wise topic and an incredibly interesting conversation.
Thanks for that, Michael. That's a uniquely interesting answer. So let's get right into it. To start, can you give us a quick overview of Vučić's leadership in Serbia and what his party's role is in the current political realm, especially considering his recent re-election?
Yeah, so first off, Vučić has been the longest-serving president of Serbia. He used to be the prime minister back in the day, and recently he just got elected for his second term, which is a term of 5 years in Serbia. He currently leads the Together We Can Do Everything coalition, which is defined as a big tent coalition made up of Alexander Vučić's Serbian Progressive Party, which is kind of like a neoliberal populist group that is also pro-European. And it has a wide variety of other parties across the political spectrum within the coalition. So in terms of the recent leadership, one of the largest, geopolitical goals for Vučić right now is, further integration into the European Union and his famous balancing act between China, Russia, and the EU, which we'll get into more later, which is also one of the largest and, most obvious trends that is going on in his current leadership.
And Michael, what's the current Serbian public sentiment towards Putin and Russians? And is it linked to any historical ties?
Okay, so many, if not most, Serbs feel as though the NATO intervention in 1999 and the bombing of Kosovo was illegal due to the lack of a trigger from the United Nations Security Council, and because of this, Russia has been vocal about the illegality of this bombing and has backed Serbia in recent years. And we see this in public sentiment today that a lot of Serbians are pro-Russia because of this fact.
And I just wanted to add on an extra question since we're on this topic. In the diplomatic realm, how is Russia key to Serbia's interests regarding Kosovo?
Okay, so even though Kosovo has now recognized itself as an independent state, with support of much of the West, and although we have seen pushback from Serbia and Russia, and most of the remaining global community, we see that under the pretenses of the UN Resolution 1244, we see that Kosovo is in international law still a part of Serbia, even though that the West regards it as it is not. So we see that Russia has been, the most reliable Security Council seat, Security Council ally that Serbia has, in claiming that Kosovo's territory is still a part of Serbia and that Kosovo still is under, Serbian rule of law and the Serbian state.
Perfect. Thanks for clarifying that. So now that we've established, the domestic sentiment towards Russia in Serbia, I wanted to understand a more economic perspective, so the level of dependence that Serbia has towards Russian gas.
Yeah, so keeping Russia close was a way for Vučić to protect himself before re-election and to maintain Serbia's supply of Russian gas, of which Serbia relies heavily upon. Most of their gas actually does come from Russia. And so the Ukrainian crisis, and as well as their gas deal, their 10-year gas deal that they had before, recently ended with Gazprom. So basically in December, Vučić had signed a gas deal that was for 6 months with Putin, but that just expired after the 6-month deadline had just recently expired on May 30th. He just signed a new 30-year gas deal. Although the prices of Russian gas does increase, Vučić is keeping his stability of gas flowing into Serbia.
So we see Serbia and this new gas deal with Russia, but I also wanted to take a step back and draw some parallels with the rest of the European region and its dependence on Russian gas. So as you may know, and as our listeners may know, we have large Russian gas importers in the EU, such as Germany, who alone receives half of its natural gas from Russia. And we also have Germany, who in the second half of March of this year remained very reluctant of EU bans on Russian energy imports and on other sanctions. So much that I do believe Germany was one of the last countries to really approve EU sanctions on Russia. So Michael, how exactly can we expect Serbia to adhere to some of these EU standards regarding sanctions towards Russia, given that countries within the EU have also struggled to outright implement them, all because of this dependence on Russian gas?
Yeah, so that really is the challenge, and that is the golden question that Vučić is going to have to answer, and Vučić is going to continue having to answer as the Ukrainian crisis goes on, and as he, hopes to have a European ascension, in the following years. One of the things that we can look back on is how the European Union actually and other Western allies had pressured Olaf Scholz to end the Nord Stream 2 pipeline deal with the Russian Federation. And it is going to be, another challenge for Vučić to do the same, to see if he's going to, have to give up on his European dream and to, in the end, look towards a pro-Russian future and more integration with the Russian Federation.
Indeed. So now that we've talked about Serbia's interests towards Russia in terms of gas as well as national support, I think it's important we delve into some of Serbia's other interests, more specifically its aspirations when it comes to joining the European Union. So as we know, since 2009, Serbia has been trying to gain EU membership, with the EU putting this issue on the sideline, especially post-Brexit. So I guess my question here would be, when it comes to these aspirations to join the EU, what are the active steps Serbia is taking to reach their ultimate goal of membership?
Okay, as of right now, I would say that Vučić is more or less unsure of his, possible ascension into the European Union. Earlier this month, we see that Vučić said that Serbia was maybe the only country to not make any progress on the front of European integration. And then more recently, yesterday, the 22nd of June, he said that he and other aspiring members, North Macedonia, Albania, and himself, Serbia, could possibly miss out on the EU Western Balkan meeting that is supposed to be a meeting of the EU powers with the Western Balkans who are aspiring to be in the European Union. And Vučić also said in December we saw a referendum being held in Serbia to change how judicial actors such as judges and prosecutors were elected into the country's judicial framework, and this would bring them into European standards, meaning in essence an easier integration into the European Union. But in the end, despite the pressure from opposition groups, the country had seen a simple majority pass with around 60% of supporting the proposition to change the judicial election system, which is of course favorable for Vučić in his goal for European integration. But we need to look at the wider picture and see how other factors are being coming into play with how Vučić will be and if he will be integrated into the European Union in the next few years.
And Michael, would you say there are any prominent players that are either disrupting or negatively influencing this process?
Yes, Serena, it's actually a great question. And one of the actors that's making it a lot more difficult for Serbia and Alexander Vučić right now is the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So, during a 2-day tour across the Western Balkans, Scholz was making a stop in Belgrade. And during his meeting with Vučić, he was doubling down on the fact that all European aspirants are going to have to follow along with the European policy. And in that case, that means that Scholz is putting pressure on, Vučić to, one, apply the sanctions against the Russian Federation and against Vladimir Putin, and as well saying that Serbia and Kosovo are going to have to recognize each other as independent states. In the end, this does mean that Scholz is telling Vučić that he's going to have to pick between Russia or the European Union. Because, one of the main reasons why Serbia and Vučić has been so close to Russia for so long is due to the fact that Russia has been, a pretty tight Security Council seat for voting against the Kosovo problem and in favor of Serbia. And, this is really not a new thing for Serbia, understanding that they're going to have to follow with the European foreign policy and in regards to Kosovo. But with Scholz doing this at a time like right now, it's especially significant because we do see other European leaders such as Scholz, trying to lead the way for Vučić and for the Serbian population to be integrated into the European bloc. But we do see that it does come with conditions and it does come with a lot of prerequisites that, Vučić is going to have to work on.
Now, you mentioned Scholz's calls for Vučić regarding the status of Kosovo, as well as the pressure to kind of maintain this balancing act between East and West, as was mentioned in your article as well. So looking at the big picture on the world stage, it's interesting to see how has this balancing act played out? In other words, what actions do we see Vučić taking, contradictory or not?
Of course, we see that Alexander Vučić having to do this balancing act between, trading his loyalties between Putin, the European Union, and Xi Jinping in China. It's quite obvious that the Serbian president, has been stuck between the three options. Even though Vučić has voted against Russia in the 3 General Assembly votes, condemning the invasion of Ukraine, it's clear that for the European Union, that what Vučić has offered in terms of a repudiation is just not enough. And this has come into play when the European Union has asked Vučić to follow the European Union's foreign policy decisions in sanctions against Russia. We also see that, with Vučić voting against Putin in front of the world stage, it's not really surprising as Serbia has also argued that it is always in conformity, or most of the times in conformity with international law, and voting in favor of UN resolutions that conform with international law. Had Vučić taken the choice to abstain from the 2 votes, from the 3 votes rather, it would have likely put Serbia at further odds with the European Union, making their ascension into the European bloc a lot more difficult and a lot less welcome. But we also need to remember the timing of which the Serbian elections that was taking place during Vučić not putting the sanctions against Russia, which probably would have made things a lot more difficult for him in terms of getting reelected, and also the symbolism of his UN General Assembly votes that did not, take away much of his credibility among the Serbian public.
I think it's great that you mention all of this, particularly if we look more into the Serbian political realm. And I think there's a real possible fear that there might be a crack or a limitation in Vučić's balancing act. And while preparing for this episode, I read that over 63% of Serbia's trade is with the EU at the end of the day, and over 77% of the direct foreign investment that Serbia receives in development aid also comes from the bloc. So these statistics are showing us how significant the relationship is between Serbia and the EU. With that said, what are the economic implications that could arise with the EU if Vučić continues such camaraderie with Putin?
So I would say that Serbia is guided by the protection of its own economic and political interests. And I would say that in the long run, one of these interests is actually going to be the integration into the European Union. We see that Alexander Vučić has made it, through his time being the Serbian prime minister and the president of the country, European integration, one of the highest and one of the most important aspirations for the country at a national scale. I would also say that the biggest cost right now, though, is the deeper integration into the European Union that is being pressured by the lack of implementation of sanctions against Russia. I think if that the European Union finds Serbia unfit to complete the accession process, and Vučić, runs the risk of not fully benefiting from EU membership and from full integration into the bloc. However, due to the fact that Vučić sees European integration as more unlikely, he has, started been playing around with the idea of expanding the Open Balkan Initiative, which is a Schengen-like bloc between Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. It allows the free travel of workers, the free movement of people, and it's really almost being called a mini Schengen, but also in the Western Balkans. However, though some analysts also assert that the Open Balkan Initiative is a ploy for Serbia to maintain its dominance over the Balkan region, which also explains the hesitance of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Montenegro into joining the pact, which may not be, the most viable solution for Serbia if they do not reach the full process of European integration.
Yeah, so from what it sounds like, the biggest cost to Vučić if he continues this relationship with Putin would be accession to the EU. But from what you've explained, he's also exploring this Open Balkan Initiative, which in essence could be an alternative to whatever he loses out on with the EU within, the Balkan region.
I completely agree, Marina. Moreover, I think that this initiative of the Open Balkan will probably bring about new opportunities, not only in the region of the Western Balkans, but as well as when it comes to negotiating and, just dealing with external actors, as we mentioned. So now we've touched upon the important players of the EU and Russia. However, Sino-Serbian relations have also greatly impacted Serbia's internal as well as external policies. In fact, in recent years, we've seen relations between Serbia and China blossom financially as well as culturally to the point where EU members of parliament have voiced their concerns about Chinese investments and projects in Serbia. So, Michael, for those of us that are not as familiar with Sino-Serbian relations and, what they mean, could you give us an idea of what the relations represent and what are some of the opportunities that are being sought here?
Yeah, so we definitely see a larger influence from the Chinese government geographically and financially in the Serbian government. We also see, there's a larger concentration of time and energy from the Chinese government in Serbia in terms of investment and in terms of resources being allocated. Recently, we see that Serbia has accepted some military equipment that they have shown off at their one of their military parades and one of their military displays, so to speak. We saw that China had provided them with Chinese-made FK-3 surface-to-air missiles, as well as CH-92A combat drones, as well as other Western and Russian military technologies being used at this military display. We also saw that Chinese FDI flows have, reached approximately 528.5 million euros in 2020, and imports from China to Serbia tallying, just over 3 billion euros worth in 2020 as well. That's according to the European Center of Foreign Relations. So, we see the aspect of the China's motivation to invest into the region is through the Belt and Road Initiative, which China trying to, have a stronger hold on the global economy and to trying to put its name out into more regions. We see them in almost on every continent right now. And, it's no surprise that Serbia, as I said before, who is a country that relies on its own political and economic interests, would be going to China when they're offering, a handout.
Okay, so just before we go into our top 3 takeaways, I wanted to just head back to our starting point, Vučić's policies, political and economic, towards Putin. So you mentioned when you were giving us his background, Michael, that he served both as PM and president. And he's also been said to be an opportunistic leader during both of those political experiences. Serbia has remained either neutral or shifted their geopolitical loyalties, according to the actors we have discussed, so China, Russia, and the EU, whenever it's up to their own interests, depending on those interests. So how would you define right now Vučić's behavior and policies? Are they opportunistic? Are they neutral? Or are they possibly influenced by a domestic shift in the Serbian parliament, with some new ultranationalist parties entering the parliament and the political sphere?
Yeah, so I think to define Vučić's behavior is also to define the challenges that he is currently facing and who he needs to please internationally. So following his win of the national election with around 2 million votes, he had vowed to continue his aim to see Serbia introduced into the European Union. But then a few weeks later, he signed a gas deal with Putin after he was being pressured by the Union, as I currently stated, to deploy sanctions against the Russian Federation. So we can see that he is, trying to please the European Union with this kind of post-election rhetoric, but also moving to please Putin and to, tighten the links with Putin despite having pressure to deploy sanctions against him by, signing a new gas deal. Another example of Vučić using his environment to his advantage was by using the coincidental timeline of the Ukrainian war alongside his re-election to highlight the need that Serbia needs him and must keep him, using the slogan "Peace, Stability, and Vučić." Though, however, in terms of ultranationalist parties entering the political sphere, it may threaten Vučić's ability to balance between the European and the European Union and Russia, as they are, generally supportive of Putin's attack on Ukraine and are opposed to any consideration of sanctions against Russia. And this is said by the one of the international secretaries of Vučić's opposition party, of the Serbian Dveri party, Andrej Mitić. We see that anti-Russian policies as anti-Serbian policies. Thus, with this being said, 2 new anti-nationalist parties, the Dveri party and the Serbian Oath Keepers, being introduced to the national parliament, it's definitely going to be an added pressure for Vučić to handle them in terms of domestic and foreign policy, and how he's going to be able to continue this balancing act between Russia and the European Union. If the ultranationalist parties get in the way and they continue to be pro-Russian very outspokenly, then it is going to be very difficult for Vučić to try and continue his ploy for European integration.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for elaborating on this topic, Michael. It seems that we've come to the end of our discussion, but before moving on to our Q&A section, we wanted to know, what do you believe are the 3 top takeaways our listeners should have, more specifically in your process of research and analysis? I think that this question is especially relevant to the topic that we've discussed today, considering that there are always new players, actors, and all kinds of new information circulating this topic, and it's very important to be able to distinguish between information, disinformation, as well as to be able to tell what are facts and what are not. And Michael, please feel free to add your personal thoughts when answering to this question.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say, one of the first things to keep into mind when, doing research and analysis is that one move by a particular leader is most of the times always done, with a goal in mind, or I think as well as in a retaliatory response. We see that a lot of times leaders will do something because something else is being done to maybe hurt their interests or maybe to progress their interests towards a specific, collective goal. Yeah. And the second one I do probably say is empathy is probably a pretty good thing to take into account when trying to understand a leader. Knowing if they're empathetic or not will generally show you exactly what they want in terms of a foreign policy decision. Do they genuinely want what's better for their country, or are they trying to, put constraints on one of their rivals or someone that's competing with them in the whole terms of the foreign policy and what's going on on the world stage right now. And lastly, I would say when you're starting to understand, research and analysis, in the international relations arena, I would say that it's wise to take one leader at a time and one topic at a time and to really dive in and understand it little by little. I'd say that this would, make you a lot better at being able to connect the dots to two different topics, to different conflicts, and you'll be able to see where each conflict, is similar in their own respects.
Okay, Michael, thank you for those top 3 takeaways. And I think we've definitely implemented, as you've said, the trying to dive deep into different pieces of information and connecting them together to have a complete understanding of Vučić and of his current political dilemma in this balancing act. But right now, it's time for our Q&A, which is a segment in which we discuss questions that are sent in by the viewers of our podcast in anticipation. And they're directed always to you, to our writers. So the first question that we have is actually from Laura from Barcelona. And she asks, how does forging a relationship with Vučić help or impact Putin? So from a Russian perspective rather than a Serbian perspective.
Yeah, so of course we do see right now that from a Russian perspective, the country is definitely losing, a lot of influence, and it does recognize that, especially with the fact that a lot of European countries and the European Union in general are, sanctioning Russia and kind of committing to an economic war with the Russian Federation due to the attack of Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. Therefore, more and more countries are aspiring to become NATO members. We see Finland and Sweden, for example, are, taking a faster route to become NATO members. And we also, we can't forget the Republic of Georgia and Moldova. So keeping Serbia as an ally, allows Russia to keep an ally in hopefully one day the European Union, but as for right now, a reasonable ally in the Balkans. And we also see that after the invasion of Ukraine, Putin cited the Kosovo precedent for the Lugansk and Donetsk regions, which is, the same legal understanding that allowed Kosovo to become independent and in effect would mean, an independent Lugansk and Donetsk. However, though with the precedent does not actually hold any weight under international law, Putin's utilization of the precedent, puts Serbia at a crossroads, and it may prove that in the long run they are no longer needed as a key ally for Vladimir Putin. Because as we see Serbia, juggling with the West, juggling with China, Vladimir Putin, I don't think right now views Alexander Vučić as somebody who he can really rely on, somebody that he can really trust in the Balkans. I think that right now he's just kind of, an opportunist leader that is trying to, please everybody at the same time. And I think Putin really does recognize that.
Perfect. So for our second question, we have Christoph from Berlin. And Christoph's question is the following. What can the West do to change Vučić's opinion? I guess what Christoph means here is that what can the EU offer Vučić, perhaps, in order to change his stance when it comes to Putin and Russia?
Yeah, for one, I don't think that there's much that the European Union can offer realistically to President Vučić to change his opinion on the matter at hand. To be honest, from a negotiation standpoint, I think it'll be pretty difficult to take whatever Vučić says at full value due to the fact that he does seem to switch between his key allies on a normal basis between, China, the West, and Russia. Though I do think that the West should put more pressure on Vučić to comply with, European foreign policy. I don't think that offering Serbia an expedited path to European ascension would really make sense, as it has offered to Ukraine and Moldova right now. I don't think that offering it to Serbia, who is and has been, pretty friendly with the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin, would be, a very smart idea. So I think at the end of the day, the European Union or von der Leyen and, the European leaders, they're going to have to make a decision, and they're going to have to let Vučić know that it's going to have to be, Vladimir Putin in Russia, or going to have to be the European Union. I think that in the end of the day, the invasion of Ukraine really put Vučić at a crossroads, and he's going to have to prove himself to the Europeans that he's able to, comply with European norms, not be an illiberal leader as him and Viktor Orban of Hungary have been, and also been, pretty friendly with Vladimir Putin. I really don't think that the European Union wants somebody, another Viktor Orban, to, be causing problems in the Union. And I think that, Vučić, at the end of the day, he's going to have to prove himself, and he's going to have to do that pretty quickly.
Okay, so to wrap up, I just wanted to go over everything we've discussed today, from Serbian domestic sentiment and parliamentary pressure on Vučić's leadership, to Serbian dependence on Russian gas, and to the possibility of Serbian membership or ascension to the EU. We've also touched upon the different actions taken by Vučić and his representatives, and the economic and political costs of said camaraderie with Putin. And I think one thing that this discussion with Michael has been made very clear to all of us, including to anyone listening, is that Vučić's relationship with Putin and the extent to which that relationship actually develops is not an easy political decision. On the one hand, we have a country who is very dependent upon Russian energy imports and who relies on Russia to support or their bloc on international recognition of Kosovo's independence, including we have a brotherhood between Russian and Serbian population, with only 26% of Serbs blaming Moscow for the current Ukrainian invasion, and a very pro-Russia outlook regarding the invasion. On the other hand, we have Serbia seeking ascension to the EU, which is also a large trading partner for the country and who has pressured the country into placing economic sanctions against Russia. So how to please both Putin and the EU is the question that we really attempted to analyze today. So big thank you to Michael for joining us in our second episode of the RAIA Affairs series, and for helping us and our listeners really understand the elements that are in the process of answering this essential question.
Thank you so much to both you, Marina, and Serene, for having me on today's RAIA Affairs podcast. It was a really great time, and I can't wait to see you guys next time.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
For those of you who are interested in reading more, make sure to really check out Michael's article. It's under the link in the podcast description, or you can also check it out at raiagroup.org. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, raia.now. It's where we post all the latest articles, as well as our new podcast episode topic, in which you can send your questions for the Q&A.
Well then, it seems that we've come to the end of our podcast. It was a pleasure hosting this talk today. We're your co-hosts, Sareen and Marina. Goodbye from us, and thanks for tuning in. Have a great day in your sphere of influence.